So I appreciate you guys for coming out in the rain, of course. And Marie approached me to do a past talk a while ago, and I just kind of had I had, sure, I'll do something. And this just kind of came to me. This would be a great opportunity to do a little bit of a tribute to Glen, especially from more of a departmental standpoint. So as a representative of the department itself. Now, most of what I wanted to talk about today was about the excavation itself at Windover. So maybe just more of like a history of the excavation. For the past 5 or 6 years, I've been having students scan and digitize the entire Windover documents collection that we have, because Glen was kind of an amazing archivalist. There's tons of slides, about 5,000 pictures that we have digitized and are now available online through Diginals and our FSU website. All of the field excavation unit forms have been digitized and uploaded. All of the field notes have been digitized and uploaded. So we have field notes from not only Glen's general field notes during the excavation, but Dave Dickel's additions, Kimura and Shapiro's editions as well. So we have quite a few books of field notes. I mean, thousands of pages of field notes. So I tried to kind of go through a few of them and pick out some interesting things that I found that were kind of entertaining. So by no means am I a complete expert at the entire history of the excavation, because that's an insane amount of information. Not only that it took the 3 years to actually excavate, or 3 field seasons to actually excavate it, but all of the recordings, all of the information recorded as well. Now, if you don't know the general history of the Windover site, it was first discovered due to essentially road construction of the Windover Estates located in Titusville, Florida, in early 1982. And during one of the, let's say, backhoe maneuvers, they were emptying out a backhoe into a backspoil, trying to kind of build up the road from the adjoining peat bog. When they emptied the backhoe, some skeletal material rolled out, essentially, from the equipment. And immediately they stopped. They called the authorities. They called the local medical examiner. They thought it was forensic, and then quickly determined that nope, in fact, it was something much, much, much different than a forensic case, a modern forensic case. So lots of individuals were actually invited, including Bill Maples from University of Florida, who's a really famous forensic anthropologist, and several others, including Glen and Dr. Daly. And luckily, other people passed on it, the opportunity, and Glen and Dr. Daly immediately recognized the importance and significance of this find and said, yes, we want to do it right away. The first indication of its antiquity really was the radiocarbon date. So they were able to get a radiocarbon date paid for by essentially the landowner, and it came to be 7,000 BP roughly, which is middle archaic, early archaic time frame. So here we have Bob Daly in the early 1982, actually at the site looking at the back spoils, and come to find there's actually quite a lot of human remains material in the back spoil as well. It just happened to notice it when they did. So in '84, after a kind of lengthy effort to get funding, the Florida legislature actually finally decided to fund the research, fund the excavation itself. So in 1984, the field season began. And the field seasons generally ran from late August to late December or early January for the seasons of 1984, 1985, 1986. And the first field season was essentially Pond A, which is the 1984 one. I have a pointer right here. So they were just doing the single pond for that first field, or single location for that first field season. The setup took quite a while, all right, a couple of months. Some of the field notes start in like July, go into June, July, and August before they actually even get out into the field, because essentially this is a huge undertaking. trying to excavate a relatively large area from a relatively even larger site itself. So things like housing needed to be arranged for the crew and the volunteers. Lab setup was actually offered by the Brevard Community College. So they had a lab to actually take the material off the site and house it in a enclosed and secure location, but it wasn't that secure. I want to say the lab was actually next to a classroom and the door didn't lock. No. So lots of things, always something comes up. Different housing arrangements needed to be made in later field seasons as well, because essentially people were covered in peat and it was clogging all of the drains when they would shower off and hose down. A semi-trailer was essentially built for storage, to house equipment, to essentially act as an office for planning and staging events and things like that, and for refreshments and other things to get out of the heat. The pond itself was along the road, so you can kind of see the road on the left side of that map. The pond itself, the staging operation essentially began with shovel testing. They shovel tested extensively, looking more at stratigraphic layers, not necessarily digging directly to find human remains or to find artifacts, but just to kind of discover which layer itself was the one that was housing this material that came out of the backhoe. So how far down do they need to go? So if they already need to dig, 4 meters, or not 4 meters, like 2 meters down to begin with, that would take probably another 2 years of excavation of this peat. So they essentially tried to determine at what point can we use the backhoe to remove a lot of the top material to then get at the material where we need to slow down and actually hand excavate. So a lot of the excavation units themselves were essentially just to test at what point do we get actual material to see how far down we need to go. There's also unassociated material that they looked at the hammock area, which is that raised section on the right, to try and see if there was any other components, like a living component site. It was discovered essentially this was a burial pond, a carnal pond or mortuary pond, not a living site for an individual. This was just a location where individuals were being brought and intentionally interred underwater, which is actually a somewhat common practice in early and middle archaic Florida. There's several sites around the state that practiced water burials or underwater burials. Now, in terms of this early material and early staging, there was quite a lot to do. Getting the site oriented, getting the crew oriented to the site, establishing their project goals, the significance that the date for the skulls and other material essentially established, setting up with the lab, gathering field equipment, including 30 pickle buckets that cost about $20 total. Now, if you guys know anything about pickle buckets, because we actually bought some pickle buckets from Firehouse a few years ago to use for flint knapping at the department. And I don't know why I didn't think that they would smell like pickles for some reason. I mean, it just didn't even clue in. They really smell like pickles. So in Glen's field notes, he actually comments about these pickle buckets really smell, and someone's going to have to take some soap and water to them at some point to then use. So, we don't want artifacts smelling like pickles, essentially. A general rule of thumb. Now, during the setup, this is kind of after a lot of the vegetation and landmass has been cleared to get the overview of the site in the top right picture. And a lot of it was used, using tractors and pretty heavy machinery to kind of get everything prepped and ready. The field house, that's the little trailer, semi-trailer that they bought off to the side, and the orange van, the orange and tan van. I also found several references to the orange van. Within the first few months of 1984, the van broke down near the interstate, near one of the interstate, US 1, I believe it was. Glen said he was worried about driving it without people around because at some point he was going to need somebody to push. And it was too large to push himself. There was a shift lever that got stuck as well overnight. So it was left at the site. The next day when they returned, the gas had been siphoned from the entire van. So, that was nice. They finally got it to the shop. They replaced the starter. And it seemed to work since then. I didn't find any other current references of the van, but that was all within the first 2 months of the site visits and the site setup. The trailer itself, someone also threw a brick through the window in early 1984, and stole a number of their items like cameras and equipment out of the trailer as well. Dave Dickel took one of the vans, I believe it was the tan van, to a doctor's office, a doctor's visit. And also the window was broken when he came back and a bag of money was stolen out of the side passenger seat. So, it started off a little rough, I guess.
Why was there a bag of money?
You'd have to ask Dave. There was a blue bag, apparently, it was only like $55, but it was a blue bag of money sitting on the seat, and someone stole it while he was at a doctor's office. Yep, not a doctor's visit. So let's at least to say they weren't without their troubles right, early on. Now, a big part of the project and a big learning curve that took months to really get a handle on was the well point system, because this is a wet site. This is a pond. This is a bog. The water table is really high. And to actually excavate without having inundation of your excavation units, they had to continuously pump the water out and away from the site. Now, this is Doran Dickel and Tom Penders essentially in the muck trying to set up this well point system for Pond A on that first field season. And they essentially used this PVC pipe and 96 4-foot-long pipes that they submerged down into the soil or into the peat, and a sump pump system to essentially just drain the section that they were going to then excavate. And there was always this constant battle between too wet, because then everything would just slump in, or too dry, because then everything would just crumble. So there's this very delicate balance that they had to meet. And of course, more things happened to the pump system, like clogging. I believe a backhoe operator hit a sidewall at one point and knocked off maybe 6 or 10 of the pipes as well. It was a constant battle. So it took over 2 months to really even drain the pond enough to then actually start excavating. So here we have the pond before draining, with the establishment prior to the sub pumps being, or the poles actually being laid out. So this is an overview of Pond A. Now in 84, they only surrounded the area that they were going to excavate in Pond A. In 85 and 86, they surrounded the entire site. So they didn't have to do this again. They just had to do it once. Now, during the process, you can kind of see the slow deterioration, the slow loss of water, right? A slow sedimentation of the water itself, and becoming more firm, right, inside the pump system. Eventually, it was drained enough and dredged enough where they could actually start getting in there and doing additional test pits and additional excavations. So the picture on the left, or sorry, the picture on the right is actually showing the drainage of the water. They had to put it somewhere. So there's this long pipe essentially going downhill to pump the water out so that it doesn't come back in to the pond. There were also dikes that they built up some earth around the water, or around the pump system, around where they were dredging it. At some point, those dikes also cracked and broke, and water rushed back too. There was also a tropical storm, Isidore, that hit in September. Florida rain is also not something, obviously, to be to make light of. Constant battle. Eventually, Here we have Glenn just looking down at the hole and seeing where the water table is, if it's low enough. Eventually, the water table got low enough where they could actually then start excavating.
Did you say that was Glen there?
Yes. Yep. It's peering down, yeah, into the hole. Yes.
He was 34 years old. He was Texas.
Yep.
That's why, looking back, I was thinking, oh my God.
How?
What did I ever do?
Yeah. I mean, seriously, the amount of ingenuity is amazing. Yes. And the size of the site, amazing they were able to do it.
And one of those vehicles was from the Correctional Institute. Every time it broke down, they would have to take it back, and there were always bars being locked behind them next to
I mean, you get your vehicles where you can get them. I mean, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think most of our museum cases came from that correctional facility as well. I'm pretty sure they did. So while all of this is going on, right, one team is essentially working on excavation units, trying to drain the pond. Another team is going through the back spoil, right? Because there's this just huge mound of dirt and peat that the backhoe had already removed from the pond. And there was a lot of material still in there. So we had constant water screening and sifting and going through in buckets and excavation essentially of the commingled material that was found in the back spoil that would later become Lot 500 individuals. So progress, finally, right? Actually doing some main pond shovel testing, Dave Dickel and David Franz, as well as doing water screening, right? With back spoil material as well as actual pond material. Of course, things happen, right? So this is Dave Dickel kind of trying to recuperate after a dike leakage, a pump clog leakage, a failure, a power issue in terms of the pump continuously going. They had to run the pump constantly to make sure that the water table just didn't come back up, right? The backhoe mistakes as well, knocking things in, and Tropical Storm Isidore. I think there's a question online. Oh, can the questions be repeated? Yes, so whoever's online, yeah, I can repeat any questions that are given in the room. Okay, so yeah, constant battles, constant troubles, always something, but eventually making progress. So finally, we start getting opening of excavation units in the main pond and main pond A. All of the plywood essentially had to be used because it's soft peat, right? It's still wet. It still has that kind of not too wet, not too dry consistency. So getting around, you could very easily sink into your knees, essentially, in terms of the muck and lose a couple of shoes, I'm sure. They also started exposing the first amount of human remains and artifacts. Now, of course, this is Florida. So even in September, October, and November, it's 90 degrees. And exposure of the remains, of course, was kind of the paramount interest and the archaeological interest of gaining access to these artifacts and burials themselves. So the remains were generally pedestaled, and plastic bins, 30-gallon plastic tubs, were generally waiting for them. So once the remains had been documented, photographed, mapped, charted according to the datum point that was set up in the grid in the southeast, they were essentially put into the tubs and brought to the Brevard Community College for analysis. Essentially, that required them to be washed, bagged, placed in the tubs themselves, stabilized, right? They're in a wet environment, so actually being stabilized with different chemical aspects, labeled, made sure that they were maintained in terms of their continuity of where they were found. All of the coordinate systems and everything had to be maintained to make sure that they knew exactly where they came from, exactly where they were found, and exactly what individual they were looking at. So all of that began really in the '84 field season. And, you know, there's always a little bit of jovial behavior going on in field seasons, of course. Constant rain, just battles where they would essentially just try to tarp everything off you would get constant filling up and then draining out and then filling up and then draining out just throughout the entire field season. So continual progress. The Pond A area is a fairly large area as well. This is just one corner in the bottom right. They were covering the human remains when they noticed them before they exposed the entire thing with these little white claws and essentially little covers, a little piece of rock or piece of peat to put on top, so that it would note where human remains have been found, but that they can then go and expose all of them, pull all of them, put all of them into the tubs, and do it just kind of all at once, so they don't have just confusion, essentially, right? Who did what, when. So you just kind of mark it when you just find it, then you come back, fully excavate it, pedestal it, and then kind of do it a little more systematically. And I mean, Glen and his crew were systematic in their excavation. They had to be. It was an amazing feat in terms of the amount of material and amount of work. Now, Glen was on site a lot during this time frame, but he was also the one in charge. So he had to constantly be essentially been pulled away from the site. So he spent a lot of time doing public outreach, notifying individuals about the significance of this site and the importance of the site, giving talks to local groups, having visitors come and actually see the site itself, doing presentations, giving interviews to news crews, having meetings, making sure that all of the equipment was still running and functioning properly, making sure anything that was broken got fixed, handling all of the money and the funds as well. I mean, the amount of work, I don't know how he slept, essentially, or how Barbara slept either, really. I mean, I'm sure you were going through it just like he was. So at the end of 1984, early 1985, so this is December 1984-85, essentially a backfill of Pond A. So they closed Pond A and then backfilled it, just put all of the dirt that they took out back in to make it as level as possible. Then the analysis starts. So in the 1984 season, they excavated lot 500, which included all of the spoil bank material and individual burials 1 through 54 from Pond A. Most of it was in the northern section and northern east section of the pond. Some of them were identifiable, clearly delineated, identifiable burials. Some of them had clusters, like the 36. So we have individuals 36, A, B, C, D, E. They were all just kind of jumbled together and then kind of separated more so in the lab. Intact crania included brain material as well. So one of the hallmarks of the levels of preservation of the peat bog itself. Here we have Doran, Hausworth, and Dickel examining x-rays from one of the individuals, 36, where there is brain material still inside the cranium itself. They did a lot of work with the Florida UF, where Hausworth and Lapis, I believe, were. So just examination of everything. Removal of brain tissue as well. Some of the really early aDNA studies were done by Hausworth and Lapis and Doran and Dickel and the whole crew, trying to look at just an anatomy of the brain itself and the levels of preservation, trying to extract DNA. So in the 1984 season, whoops, I went back up, right? 1985, right, at the end of the 1984 season, they were essentially testing, shell testing other areas, right? Where else do we want to dig? So level C, right, or burial C down at the bottom, and Pond E and C. So we have the 85C and then Pond E over to the right, or over to the east. So they decided, let's try that. The E was almost kind of like let's look outside and see if anything is out here. Pond C was just kind of straight down from Pond A. So trying to maybe get the boundary of the site itself, the boundary of the burial of the cemetery. Again, they set up the well points, much like Pond A, except this time they did it entirely around the entire thing, right? Not just the ponds that they were going to excavate. They also continued to excavate the spoil bank because I think they only got maybe like a third of the way through on that first field season. There was so much backfill from that backhoe. So I tried to put together bunch of pictures to illustrate kind of the overview of the site. Because I think a lot of these overview pictures were taken with like a cherry picker or something, or probably just in the bucket of the backhoe. Just, you know, I'm sure it was totally safe and nobody got hurt ever. But essentially the red squares are kind of an estimation of where the excavation locations were. So the first on the top here, this would be Pond A, then Pond C from 1986, then Pond C from 1985, and Pond C from 1986 as well. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of the kind of immensity of area. And around the outside, you can see this white pipe. That's the well pump system, right? It was just around Pond A. Now it's around the entire thing. So they can come back in 86 and just pump it out again. They don't have to reset anything. And continued, right? Just continued to move pretty smoothly, so to speak. Lots of excavation, lots of organization. Again, getting down to the level at which the material is found, and then just continued systematic excavation of each unit, making sure to map and document everything. The amount of notes is just absolutely amazing, and the amount of detail that each individual took into account. The number of images as well, thanks to Richard Brunk. Is that right? Yeah, Brunk. He was the site photographer. So the amount of photos are just amazing as well to look at. So there's a lot of detail, right, in a lot of these notes. Now, some are a little hard to read. I blame handwriting, obviously, the chicken scratch, as well as the age. I mean, these are from the 1980s, so the pages have deteriorated. But now that they're digitized, at least we can try and decipher some of the handwriting. But I mean, this is just looking at on September 24th, these are all of the burial units that are currently active and being excavated. That's a lot of burial units being currently excavated and essentially going through each and every individual or each and every thing. Oops. It's not muting. I don't know why it wouldn't mute. But if you can try to read some of that, I mean, essentially it's just a description, right? Red, brown, peat, transitions in unit 211 at 120 centimeters, also in 229 and 231 from 125 to 135 centimeters. Lot 210, red, brown, peat transitions. I mean, it's a real page turner overall in terms of a descriptive, but I mean, that's the process, right? That's archaeology in and of itself. Without that, I mean, we don't have that information. I mean, we could really reconstruct a three-dimensional site map from this stuff. I mean, it's nauseating and sometimes boring, but it's super detailed, and that's the point. That's how it should be. It should be that detailed. Right? So it was done with incredible care. There's also something apparently called the Windover fever going around, which I'm assuming is having to do with the Florida heat or mosquitoes or bugs or water or peat or any other number of things essentially occurring. So here we have Glenn again looking at CT scans from individual 67. So this is one of the individuals they found in field season 2 in the 1985. Getting a CT scan of the skull itself, again, to look at brain material. A total of, 91 individuals that were excavated out of the total 168 had brain matter. So a large portion still had soft tissue material preserved. Again, there's a lot of interest, a lot of crew, a lot of film and kind of media interest in general. So he continued to teach, continued to do talks, do meetings, right? Have people come and interview him. It was a very public kind of aspect of this excavation in and of itself. And this is just a nice overview of the overall size of just Pond C, one of the ponds that they were excavating, and each different layer and each different area in terms of the excavation units. You can see how large the people are. So this is a large excavation. This is a big undertaking. Of course, there's always also a bit of fun, right? Dixie Crossroads, rock shrimp. I was lucky enough when I went down to Brevard to actually go to the Brevard Museum, to go to Dixie Crossroads with Rochelle Marinin. And we had a beer in terms of for the Wendover folks. And some very interesting commentary from Kamara about the Wendover women. Billy Banton dated John McEnroe, left for downhill gold medalist Lionheart Stack from Austria or Lake Placid. Bill Watlow, a champion karate. Guillermo Vilas, a tennis player. Phone call from Bjorn Borg. Cliff Drysdale, tennis now commentator. Apparently those are all the people she's dated or claimed to date. Madeline Carr as well, bought Zappa a pink tutu. Knows Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Clapton, all the Yardbirds, and the Beatles, especially Paul McCartney. I'm not sure what they're trying to imply. Elizabeth, the ancestors from Transylvania, great-great-grandma responsible for the deaths of 650 virgins. I thought Billy and Madeline had interesting backgrounds. Apparently she's related to Elizabeth Bathory, or so she claims.
Now, Madeline Carr is still around.
Yes, they did. I did notice that as well, yes.
Her husband was in the
Yeah.
music industry.
So, interesting. Now, as a side note to these comments, I also found a passage in Glen's field notebook referring to the need to impress on the crew about professionalism in note-taking. I'm not sure if that comment occurred before or after this, but he clearly knew something was going on, that it meant that much. Now, during the 85 season, it just, again, continued to excavate and progress on the excavation. This is a collapse of one of the sidewalls when it got a little too dry. So that just shows you the very delicate balance that needed to be struck with these pump systems. Not too wet, not too dry, or else the integrity of the sidewalls and the excavation units themselves could fail and crumble. And of course, the field season photo, the end field season photo, right? There's always the professional one and then the funny one. And I don't know why the buckets. Those are probably the pickle buckets, actually. At that point, they probably did not smell like pickles, more like peat. I believe the white dog, as well in this picture, didn't belong to anyone, but it just roamed around and kind of visited.
No, I bet that was Dave Dickel's.
No? Oh, maybe Dave Dickel's dog. Okay. Okay. I'm thinking of the turkey at Mound Field. There's Dr. Perez did a field season back in like 2014 or something. And apparently one of the neighbors had wild turkeys that would just come visit during field season. So I was curious if that was just a random dog, because they're in all of these pictures. That makes sense that it's Dave Dickel's. So again, the backfilling, right, in 1985, all right, replacement of all the material back into the excavated units and the excavated ponds, and the process of analysis. So the pond C, which was down in the south region of the site, there was quite a few material, right, including lot 66, which was again a cluster of individuals, including the individual with spina bifida, right, the separation of the sacrum and the protrusion of the spinal column. It looks like the individual is 15 years old, probably paralyzed from the waist down, most likely died of an infection in the leg and the tibia, especially as heavy osteomyelitis. But Pond E, which was kind of that one off to the side, there was only a single burial found, or not even a burial, I believe, just a single human remain, a single bone. So not much at all found in that area. So that's essentially a sterile location. So for the 86 field season, they decided to go back up to their more productive locations. So one pond adjacent to A, also Pond C, and then one pond, an additional Pond C down at the southwest extension of the 85 excavation. And again, progress. They knew what they were doing at this point. Now it was old hat, right? I mean, problems still happened, but it was much smoother than the original 1984 field season. The sub pump material and system had still been set up. It had been essentially stayed. So it was pretty easy to get everything up and running and the excavation starting. So Pond C and the Southwest Pond C was also very productive over the course of the 86 season. It gets hot in Florida, even in October, November, December. So coverings were not only for the protection of the field workers and volunteers, but also for the protection of the human remains. A couple of these sheets that you just see kind of on the side. So these sheets are all covering human remains. You can see how close they are together. They were opening excavation units and finding 3, 4, 5 burials right next to each other, all kind of accumulated, and differentiating them as burials as well, not as commingled. These were specific in situ burials that were very close in proximity. So it essentially became real slow progress, right? If you don't find anything in an excavation unit, it's real easy to go through that excavation unit pretty quick. If you find stuff, that's when you have to slow down and be essential and methodical in terms of your excavation methodology in general. So everything just kind of slowed down and went at not a snail's pace, but a slow progress, right? Being incredibly intentional in terms of the tools and materials and gathering information and documenting information, documenting the positions of every single burial in the plot, every single burial in the pond, orientation, location compared to one another, objects as well, artifacts, everything documented. Now, after everything has been lifted, you essentially get this beautiful profile, right, of the site. So you can clearly see this delineation of soil in the stratigraphy. There's still some stuff they need to excavate that's covered in the white tarps there on the right, but slowly getting all of it done. And again, we have the white dog and the plastic flamingo. And then here we have imaging. I like that one. So clearly somebody's getting an interesting shot and needed Glen's help to not fall into the pit or rip his pants off. But we get a beautiful stratigraphic layering of that red peat material. That's where most of the material was found, in that kind of layer. So in the kind of write-up and analysis, this lower red brown peat and this rubber area that date to around this 7,000 to 8,000 year time frame, that's where they were finding all of the human remains and faunal material. So above it, sterile, below, sterile. That's where the area in terms of the time frame in which they were finding it. So this is the Southwest Pond C. They found a couple of burials, including a cluster of individuals with burial 99. Pond C adjacent to Pond A, 80 burials, over 80 burials in that single location. That's what took a lot of time on that third field season. So they just happened to kind of hit pay dirt essentially in terms of what they were looking for in that last field season. And this is a sketch of essentially the layout of the remains as well on the left, many of which contained artifacts, textiles covering the burials as well, woven fabrics, wooden artifacts, including stakes, and essentially a reconstruction of the mortuary practice could then be done. So what the Windover individuals were doing was they were wading out into the pond, spreading the muck, interring the individual, usually in a fetal position, covering them with textile, and then staking them down so that wood stakes were protruding above the waterline. The wood stakes are still there. The textile is still there. Stomach contents are still there. Brain material is still there. Wooden artifacts are still there. Absolutely amazing preservation because of the peat bog. Essentially, it was an anaerobic environment. So the final day before closing included the tour day. So we have essentially just tons and tons of people coming to see the closing of the site and the final excavations of the site. Lots of school children, I'm sure Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and pretty much everybody, as well as legislative individuals and high up bigwigs as well, came to view essentially the site before its closing. So the final closing and backfill occurred in January of 1987 at the end of the 86 field season. It also included a back pump of all of the water to then re-inundate essentially all of the water or all of the materials that had been sucked out to begin with. Overall, in terms of findings for the site, 186 individuals, including 67 subadults and 101 adult individuals, 58 from the backhoe back spoils from the excavator, 101 in situ burials, so burials that were still in place. Sex estimates as well puts it about even, about 47 males and 47 females. 91 of the individuals had brain material, 41% of which were subadults and 63% were the adults. Textiles and foods were found covering the bodies. The food essentially was representative of the stomach contents for those individuals, but also interred artifacts like a gourd and prickly pear. The artifacts, 384 total artifacts were found. So bone and antler tools, faunal teeth like dog teeth, possum teeth, raccoon teeth, modified shells that were actually modified into beads. So the shells had been filed down and used as necklaces. One of the burials actually had the shells around the neck of the individual still. Lithics, there are only 4 lithics, stone tools, and that was it. Fabrics, stakes, and seeds as well. Many of the seeds had been used as beading too. They had been perforated and strung for jewelry, essentially, personal adornment. So a huge amount of information, a huge amount of material, and that's why it's essentially still being studied today, because there's just so much. Now, in terms of the history of the excavation, that's all I wanted to cover, but I also wanted to just briefly talk about Glen's 35 years at FSU and over 50-year career as an anthropologist and archaeologist. He didn't just stop at FSU. Right? He continued to excavate sites across Florida, including Buckeye Knoll, which is in Texas, and then all over the southeast in Florida. But a lot of his work was done at Buckeye Knoll. Tons of research, tons of publications, teaching lots of different classes, traveling around the world like Japan and Italy, among other places, was a staunch advocate and activist in terms of protection and conservation laws as well. Over the course of his career, he was a 35-year registered professional archaeologist, chair at the Department of Anthropology twice in 1980 to 2015, or sorry, that was his whole career at FSU, 1999 to 2000 and 2008 to 2014. He had over 35 grants, federal and national and regional grants totaling over $1.4 million. He was named Floridian of the Year in 1986 for his work in Wendover. He had a Development Scholarship Award in 1988, a Teaching Incentive Award in 95, a Leadership Award in 2013 for something that I'll talk to in just a second. 50 plus invitations to present information and talk to the public, National Geographic, Discovery documentary, 15 different courses taught at FSU throughout his career, about 124 different honors thesis, master's dissertation, PhD dissertation, chair and members. For 20 some odd years, he taught forensic anthropology to law enforcement in Florida as well, essentially taking them out into the middle of nowhere and showing them how to find a body and excavate it properly. 20 plus journal articles, the edited volume of the Wendover book, the multidisciplinary study, book chapters, invited lectures, conference presentations, archaeological reports. I mean, he was a workhorse. He did not stop, and he really became an expert at everything he did. He was a well-respected wet site archaeologist from what he learned at Wendover. And he literally became like the authority in wet site archaeology. So the different courses he taught, wetlands archaeology was one of them. Right? North American archaeology, intro archaeology, cultural anthropology, forensics, human osteology, undergrad and grad level, just tons of different courses. Engaged in law enforcement training, taught immersive forensics to law enforcement, essentially trained them how to find material from surface burial or from surface scatter, as well as burial and actually excavating the individuals. And a lot of that took a lot of time because he literally went out into the middle of the woods and buried a plastic skeleton. And then months later had to bring people back and remember where he buried it. That's hard to do. But the whole process of organization and collaboration with law enforcement, teaching them literally how to walk a scene, how to excavate a scene properly, how to bag and tag everything, and maintain things like chain of custody. One of the biggest involvements that I had with Glen personally was the Knowles Need Anthropology campaign that occurred in 2009. So he became chair in 2008 for the second time. In 2009, the Florida legislature and FSU decided to cut everyone's budget and essentially threatened to dissolve departments, entire departments at the university, which some of them they did. Anthropology was on the chopping block. And Glen and Barbara, thank you, Barbara, were tireless in their efforts in organizing marches, organizing protests, writing petitions, writing letters, and I mean, just over the top amount of work to try and get anthropology to stay at FSU. And finally, it was essentially redeemed. So in 2013, we got our bachelor's back after its suspension. 2014, we got the master's back, and we are slated to get the PhD back once we get more faculty. So that was just amazing. Yes.
So this excavation happened approximately 40 years ago.
Yes.
And I kept thinking, if it was found today, how will we approach it? Would it be similar methods, or has there been any advancements that we would take advantage of, or would it be literally going through the muck again? Just like,
Yeah. Completely honest, it would not get excavated today. There's too many, like NAGPRA laws, the Native American Grave Protection Repatriation Act. It's very unlikely that an excavation of that magnitude would be essentially sanctioned and approved by Native American activists and funded at all by NSF or anything.
would
So
it be any excavation?
I honestly don't think there would
I
be.
would like near here.
Yeah.
And we found stuff that,
Yeah.
this whole area could probably be excavated.
I don't doubt it. Yeah. But I mean, because that's a location where there are known remains and known burials, and Glen did get it registered as a national landmark, it's protected. So there just wouldn't be, honestly. I think no one would try to do an excavation.
Throughout the United States, or?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much since 1990. Yeah. In terms of other stuff, right? The last graduating PhDs from 2013, we have with Glen. I think he was the doctoral advisor for at least two of them, and I think he served on every single panel, every single committee for those last few years as well. And then this is right before one of the marches down to the Capitol that we took photos of in front of the FSU Westcott building. A lifelong community and field advocate as well. So he helped with unmarked burial laws, the 872, Chapter 872, which is a Florida-specific burial law that protects any unmarked burial, essentially in a private or public land, federal or private land, protecting any human remains. He assisted in the acquisition of the Governor Martin House for the DeSoto, which we are sitting in right now, essentially. Got Windover as a designated National Historic Landmark in '87. He was the chairman of the board for the Osceola Research Institute in Monticello. He helped lobby the federal legislature to protect sites all across, even after retirement. He was a panelist at the Division of Historic Resources. He was a research coordinator and board member for PAST. He was a reviewer for the Southeast Archaeological Bulletin. I mean, it's just the amount of material and the amount of things that he accomplished. I didn't know how long to make this slideshow because I could essentially teach a 6-week course on Glen. He was also a master blow dart artist. So he and Barbara, thank you again, Barbara, for hosting the fish fry, the annual fish fry for 23 years at their house. So this is Glen, of course, cooking up the shrimp because he made the world famous kitchen sink shrimp where, I mean, I think the ingredients list has to be 20 to 30 spices alone, at least. He was also a connoisseur of all kinds of different foods. He taught me how to eat shrimp with the tail on, actually, because why would you eat the tail? And he's like, it's really good. So yeah, lots of different things. He introduced in the pig roast in the fall, he introduced the students to a mystery meat, Rocky Mountain oysters. That was hilarious, especially when they told them what they just ate. They were not happy, but it was hysterical on our end. And yeah, just a master at everything. So now I'm going to shamelessly plug our fish fry, which is this Saturday at the Martin House. And this is the first year that we are renaming the fish fry to the Daily Doran fish fry. So. Because he has just been such an amazing presence for the fish fry, for the pig roast, an amazing supporter of every student he's ever had, and continued to be a supporter even after they graduated. The level of involvement and the level of dedication that he had for the students, for the university, for the department is just unmatched. So we felt it only easily decided to rename it the Daily Doran Fish Fry. So that's this Saturday at the Martin House. We are also having a showcase of research that's ongoing at the university, at the department on Friday for our undergraduate and graduate students as well. So trying to continue the legacy that Glen set out. So thank you guys very much. If there are questions. Yeah.
Going to all of those few houses that were in the periphery. And eventually that you showed, come towards the end that there was a, community.
Yeah.
There. So it didn't look like there was any fence up or anything.
I don't believe so. I want to say after.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah. So someone asked, there's no fence or anything like that. So what kind of, protection or anything like that around the site during the excavation or after the excavation? While they had equipment there, after the trailer was broken into, essentially Glen said, or in the field notes, he said that someone's going to have to sleep out there until we get some security and some power and some utilities out to that location. In the off season, I don't know if anything was done in terms of protection of the site in and of itself. But during the field season itself, I believe people stayed there. And they would kind of rotate maybe at the field house or at the trailer. Yeah. Yes.
Since most of the skulls contain brains, why didn't all of them?
So the question was, why did only some of the skulls contain brains and not all of them? Essentially, it's differential preservation. Some of the remains are in a lot better shape than others. So the pH and the kind of general composition of the peat bog itself, it's over a pretty large area. And some areas resulted in the bones turning really dark brown and are very fragmentary and generally brittle, whereas other areas, they're like nice bone color. I mean, they almost look like they've only been deceased for 10 years. And just amazing levels of preservation. So even within the peat bog itself, there was a little bit of differentiation in levels of preservation. So some just happened to be in a position or at a depth or at a region of the pond that just aided preservation. For some reason, that last burial, the last pond, Pond C in 86, not a lot of those people, even though they found 80 burials, not a lot of them had brain matter. Whereas in the other locations, many of them, most of them did. So it's just kind of an oddity. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I have another question. Was there any kind of facsimiles of what these people looked like? I mean, I guess they were Homo sapiens.
Yeah. I mean, they're Native Americans. I mean, they're 8,000 years old Native American individuals. At the Brevard Museum, they actually have let me see if I might be able to even pull it up. If they have an image of it. Teams. That's okay. Go away. Where's your search bar? That's weird.
Having to use our personal laptop.
I just wanted to Google something.
Oh dear, yeah, because
Guest
it wants to know. Just click on me.
Guest mode.
Yeah,
Oh, there we go. Thank you. So the Brevard Museum has really the only Wendover exhibit that's kind of active. There's also one at the Orange County Historical Center in Orlando. But a couple of years ago, they did a reconstruction of the Wendover exhibit in which we did a replica of facial approximation. I actually sent in, did you see it?
For some reason, it's not showing up on there.
Oh, yes. It's weird.
It's gonna show up, but it's not through.
Oh, I mean, it's still the HDMI.
And
Ah.
it should be still.
Not a direct line, but
Yeah.
Never mind. Okay.
We're not
Well,
testing it like in Chrome.
that's okay.
It's through Zoom.
I'll say you guys can look it up too. So at the Brevard Museum, you should just do a Google image search of like Wendover Brevard Museum, and there's a female bust that an artist did, a clay model of a female individual from Wendover, based on my craniometrics that I sent them of one of the individuals. So, but yeah, I mean, just a 8,000-year-old Native American. Yeah.
what's the current status of the remains themselves?
They're stable and housed at FSU. So yeah.
Very, very professionally.
Yeah, archival quality boxes and padding and everything.
What about the frozen materials?
Unfortunately, the brain material in particular went originally to Shands in UF, and then it went to the Smithsonian, and then it came back to us in 2013, where there was a freezer failure. So all of the material brain matter has been lost, but all of the textiles material is still at Mercyhurst, where it's being housed and curated. Yeah. Yeah.
For the CT scans, was there a hospital that you guys, that was partnered
I
with,
believe
or
Shands was kind of the go-to. That's where Houseworth and Lapis were
you're using it
located.
as one, on site, so.
Yeah, no, yeah, especially in the 80s. Yeah, they had to, that was expensive, I'm sure, as well. Yeah, Lonnie. Go ahead.
I don't think enough has been said about Glen as a person.
Mhm.
And I'd like to say just a few things. I mean, he was obviously brilliant, we all know that. But he was such a kind and gentle person who could just kind of throw oil over troubled water and I always admired him for that. Glenn and I had a number of adventures in advocacy, working down at the legislature to prevent pot hunters from digging up state lands. Glenn was very active in that. One of the most memorable things was when the city of Tallahassee allowed the developer to destroy the Cascades area before it was tested archaeologically. And so Glenn and I trotted down to the Downtown Improvement Authority and met with the developer. And if Glenn hadn't held me down, somebody would have got hurt. The developer was a much bigger guy than I was. But Glenn somehow managed to develop an agreement with the city to at least do a small salvage excavation down there. That's the kind of person he was who could jump into a situation and make peace even with troublesome people like me. And I always admired him for that, and I'll miss him.
I think we all, yes.
If you've got 30 minutes, carve out a little time on well points, but don't, you need more, but not more time, just more of other stuff. And so somewhere along the way, one of the leakies, and I'm sorry, I don't know which one, came, and they're the ones that do the research in Africa and on the big lake and all of that. I am not the anthropologist and things. But anyway, they came to FSU and they met with people on the FSU campus. And so they had lunch with the department. And I said, oh man, this is so exciting. And so when he got home, I said, well, so did you get to talk to him? Yes. Well, so did you talk about the site? He says, Barbara, ours is only 8,000 years old. He says, but he did ask me about the well.
Barbara, would you mind coming up here for a minute and just saying hi to our online audience? Because we do have a lot of people that have joined us online, just for a chance for them to get to see you. So they can wish you their best. If you could just wave, you can see yourself in the camera. Thank you. Thank you.
I want to fill in a little bit about that story about the leaky. It was Mary Leakey who came to visit, and she smoked cigars. And afterwards, they saved one of the cigars that she had left. So there, for a while there, Mary Leakey's cigar was floating around the campus.
Well, if you missed that, you really need to be here next time. Except for those of you who are out of town, we understand. But Geoff, what a wonderful presentation, a wonderful tribute, especially to those of us who knew Glen. And as Lonnie said, what a wonderful person he was. And we really, truly do miss him. But to thank you for coming out in this awful weather. And this might be too big. I still have a bunch of shirts somewhere in this house, but yeah, they're not all there now. There's somewhere.
Thank you.
So I think it's probably too big for you.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And I realized that we have a lot of new faces here. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Marie Prentice, and I'm the president of PAST. And I'd like to, for my other board members to please stand, those of who braved the terrible weather. Leon is our secretary. Lonnie Mann is an at-large member, a former longtime membership director, and Hank Pratt, our treasurer, who is an absolute treasure in and of himself for all that he does for us. Thank you so very much for all of you. And one other thing I want to mention, well, Barbara's here, and you really don't even know about this, but we have decided as a board, we tried to do a donation to FSU, and it seems like for whatever reason, it's not going to work out that way. But what we thought we would do is do directly through PAST. We're going to work with Geoff to identify a graduate student who might be in some need of a little financial support, that it's somebody that Glenn would have taken under their wing. And we know that you can help us with that.
Definitely.
So we'd like to announce that tonight while you're here, Barbara,
That's
that we
amazing.
have not forgotten that. And we definitely want to honor Glenn. And thank you all so much for coming out. So nice to see new faces. Past-tallahassee.org is our website. You can check that out for how to become a member or talk to any of the board members that I introduced you to. And we are going to meet here again next month. And hopefully we'll have, usually we're a few more people than this, but of course the weather, we really appreciate you coming on the terrible weather. And thanks so much to everybody online too. We really appreciate your support the last couple of years, but it's great to be back together. Thank you so much for coming. Please eat up. Everybody.